Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about the strategic journey of a BC-based housing provider, which is Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society. So my name is Gabrielle Magnin, and I'm the Resource Inventory Manager at the Community Housing Transformation Center. Our guest today will be Lilian Chau from Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society, and the session will be moderated by my colleague Severn Nelson. She's a project manager for BC. We are going to start with a few housekeeping items. So before we begin with the content, I'm going to say a quick note. I will say that in English and then in French. So note that today's discussion is recorded and it will be in English with interpretation into French. So if you want to listen in English, just don't touch anything. But if you want to listen in French, as shown here, you can click on the globe icon for interpretation. Or if you don't have the globe icon, you can click on the More icon and select the French channel. Donc la discussion d'aujourd'hui, elle est enregistrée et elle va se dérouler en anglais avec une interprétation simultanée en français. Donc pour écouter en anglais, vous ne touchez à rien. Et pour celles et ceux qui veulent écouter en français, là, vous cliquez sur l'icône d'interprétation qui représente un globe terrestre ou sur l'icône plus qui représente les 3 petits points. Et vous sélectionnez le canal en français. So first, as we gather online from many places across Turtle Island, we want to acknowledge that we are joining from lands that have long been home to indigenous peoples. So we recognize the enduring presence, the rights and stewardship of First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, and we encourage everyone to reflect on and contribute to the indigenous lands from which they are joining today. There is a link in the chat box, I think, if you want to learn more about the territory your home or your work is located. And this website is available both in French and in English. And as for me, I acknowledge that I live on the unceded lands and waters of Jojage, and that no treaty or agreement ceded this place. I recognize it as the traditional and living territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. As I've been living near the Lachine Canal, I learned that it was built to bypass powerful rapids and that this construction altered ancestral ways of life and connections. And before that, it was a fertile land and a gathering place for many First Nations. But then colonial constructions and policy have displaced and harmed indigenous peoples, and these impacts are ongoing. So I'm committing to listening and learning from indigenous voices, leaders, artists, and makers, and to moving forward with humility in respect for the nations to whom they forever belong. So today's webinar is presented by the Community Housing Transformation Center. The center is a catalyst for the growth and the preservation of community housing in Canada. The center offers different services. We have funding programs, and we also provide a diversity of tools and resources, including the resource inventory that you can access on our website. And that's the reason of why we gather today, as this webinar is part of the center's knowledge sharing series. So it is a series that explores proven models and highlights the people who make them possible. So today, Lilian. And you can access this knowledge sharing webinar series through our website as well. So today, I was speaking of Lilian. Lilian Chau is our speaker of the day, and she is the CEO of Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society. So welcome, Lilian. She will guide us through the strategic journey of the organization. And the moderator for the session will be my colleague Severn Nelson. She's the program manager for BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba at the center. Note that we have an article about Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society for anyone who wants to learn more about the organization after the webinar. You will also find the link in the chat. And Severn, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be speaking with Lilian Chau today about Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society and its journey to growth. On that note, Lilian, can you tell us a bit about Entre, Nous, Femmes? Why was it founded and how is it going today?
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be sharing a little bit about our journey and our story at Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society. And I'm really grateful to be here today. So the story of Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society actually started over 40 years ago with three single mothers. And they actually were really could not find affordable housing for families like their own, so other single parent families. And therefore, they actually received $1,000 from the YWCA. We are located in Vancouver. And so they actually used that money and created their own organization and then proceeded to take advantage of some of the funding programs that were available at the time. This is the early mid 80s and into the early 90s, and actually started developing affordable housing for single parent families. Since then, obviously, they have left a really amazing legacy, and we continue to build on that. And the folks that we serve as a priority are still women, single parent families. We also serve seniors, people with disabilities, and also Indigenous and other equity deserving groups. And just a note, we are an independent affordable housing provider. We are a charity as well. And we also are not exclusive, but we have identified these as our priority groups, given that they are still have challenges to access safe and affordable housing. Maybe I'll just share a little bit just about us as an organization from kind of an asset or property. Obviously, we are a nonprofit housing provider. We have just under 400 units of affordable housing. Majority of them are family-size units. We have 13 properties across Metro Vancouver. So we are in multiple different municipalities here in British Columbia in the Lower Mainland. And we serve over 1,200 people in our homes. And of course, these include adults as well as children and seniors.
That's quite an impressive growth that your organization has managed to achieve. Was it always about growth for ENF? How did you come to be on a journey with ENF yourself?
So my journey with ENF, I've been in the nonprofit sector about 8 years. I actually worked in the public sector for many years in urban planning. And I really wanted to see a shift in the work that I do that has more impact on community. And with Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society, they were also on a transition time. In 2017, there was obviously the National Housing Strategy. There was a new funding available as well in British Columbia. And the board at the time really wanted to take advantage of this and see if there are ways to redevelop some older sites as well. So I came in with really a mandate to grow the organization. And really the first impulse was really about taking advantage of those funding opportunities.
You've mentioned before that you started with a theory of change and that's been the foundation of ENF's strategic direction. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, our theory of a change was developed as we were doing our strategic planning. And we thought it would be really important to understand, we know what our mission is, which is to provide a safe, affordable home for everybody. However, we also need to understand a bit more of the why. Why is that important? And how does that contribute to community? So you can see here, we basically created this statement that really shares our understanding of why we provide safe and affordable housing. So basically, if we provide affordable, safe, and secure housing for the people that we serve, in particular, women, gender diverse people, single parent families, and equity deserving communities, and we do so in ways that deepen belonging and community connections, then we provide a stable foundation from which broader opportunities can be pursued, which improves the quality of life for individuals, families, and whole communities. So our vision is of course, we're a housing organization. However, we know that there are impacts that are beyond that. Housing serves as a basic need. And from providing that basic need, we're able then to provide opportunities. We're able to enable folks that live in this housing to explore other opportunities, and really serves as a foundation for a healthy communities and connected communities.
You saw the need for this in your constituents and the folks that you're serving amid recent economic pressures and the needs of women, their children, and the broader community.
Yeah, it was this statement, I think, for any organization really helps to, when you're talking to board members, when you're talking to your team members, and how you're explaining why you exist as an organization. Basically, this statement kind of gives you the why behind the work that we actually do. And the strategic plan and, the other plans and the other work that we do is really about how and then how we implement. But this is really the bigger vision that we have about why we exist as an organization and the positive impact that we want to have on individuals as well as the community.
Thank you. Incredible work. ENF now has a clear growth target to double impact by 2028. How is that goal rooted in your mission?
Great. Actually, we might want to move to the next slide, but I'll talk a little bit, maybe just a bit on our strategic planning and how we kind of got to that shift. So in terms of growing the housing, that really started with our strategic plan that we started in 2023. And again, when I started with the organization, we had a one-pager with very minimal statements on it. And it wasn't really enough for us to really understand like who are we serving? How are we doing this? What are some goals and targets? And so we actually had a very robust strategic plan that, as you saw, created the theory of change, but it also created these areas that we want to improve. Sorry, maybe Gabrielle, if you can go back to that previous slide. Thank you. And so you'll see these 4 areas, which are, I would say, pretty typical for any organization. So we want to create priorities in these 4 areas. So 1, maintain and optimize our current property. So these are about our current assets. And then we want to grow the portfolio, but in an equitable way. We want to enhance our organizational capacity in order to actually do all these things. And then kind of pulling everything together is about improving resident well-being. And this is interesting for our organization because we do not provide social services or community services. We are an independent housing provider, but we thought this was a very important point to have as well, because we did see people having some challenges with their tenancies. And even though we're just, we are providing a roof over someone's head, that basic infrastructure, we know that there are also other ways we can help assist folks in maintaining successful tenancies and also providing other ways to, partly our mission is gender equality and also equitable access to affordable housing. So we then created this additional strategic priority to actually assist in, community connections and all those other things that you actually need in order to operate well and in order for people to have, that community that they actually want to live in.
We have a question from the chat. How does Entre, Nous, Femmes monitor and evaluate its theory of change, strategic plan, and priorities, i.e. resident survey or other tools?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have out of our strategic plan, we actually have a strategic business plan. And the business plan actually identifies all the priority areas and the tasks and the ways that we implement. It has deadlines. It has so for example, one of the tasks about growing the portfolio equitably, that's the strategic priority. One of the tasks or deliverables would be to create a community real estate strategic plan. And then it had a set time, who it's assigned to. And then also we put a little bit of a budget of how much would that cost. So we actually have an idea of how, if we implement all these things in our strategic plan, how much money would this actually cost? And therefore then where we need to source maybe some funds. In addition to that, for the resident well-being, we do actually implement a survey every 3 years. So we actually did this 3 years ago. So we're actually in our second phase, and that survey will go out this year. We're in the process of creating some KPIs that then can be provided to the board. So we're just kind of working through that with the board about some quantifiable aspects that they can then monitor, how is the organization doing besides just looking at, our usual annual financial statements and things like that. But it could be about vacancy rates, it could be about turnover, it could be about a number of things. So that's something that we're still working on with our board.
Wonderful. I've heard you speak about having a resident well-being plan, financial planning, and all these different strategic plans. They all mesh together to move you forward. Can you say a bit about that, about how you look at the picture as a whole and strategize with the moving parts?
Yeah, maybe great to go to the next slide. So basically why we had to kind of move forward in a different way. So I think we're very similar to a lot of housing organizations across the country where we were, there was funding in the early 80s and 90s. We built a bunch of housing and then there was no more funding. And then we became operators for 40 years of affordable housing. And really where the shift happened was a little bit on obviously there's some funding available. However, we were also facing some significant challenges. So obviously there is still a housing crisis in Canada and certainly in the communities that we serve. And there's still demand for deeply affordable housing. We have also as you see here, a changing context. So we have expiring operating agreements. So these were all the agreements that were signed with the federal government back in that day. Those are all coming up for expiry. For us, that's March 31st, 2028. We have obviously buildings are now over 35 years old, almost 40 years old. They need a lot of capital renewal. And there isn't a huge pot of money there to actually renew these buildings. So what do we do with these aging assets? And as I mentioned, there was development opportunities. We do have municipalities here in the Lower Mainland that were also offering land. We have a provincial housing authority called BC Housing, and they were providing a lot of provincial funding to develop more subsidized housing at that time as well. And then also, Savern, you talked about why the shift. So we were operator for many, many years. Given all these challenges, we knew that we had to become more financially sustainable, right? The government subsidies and government funding is going to be less and less and less. And we have aging assets. So that means the costs of operating of these buildings are going up. So how do we kind of deal with that? And so we really need to create a bit of a roadmap of how do we remain financially sustainable so that we can continue the work of the organization, which to us is still a very important need. And we also want to, as you said here, increasing our impact across different communities. So the next slide, I think, talks a little bit more about I think that's the blue one. There we go. And so to your second part of the question, a little bit more on the real estate piece. So really, we're a housing organization. We deal with properties, we deal with assets, as well, obviously, with residents. So we're really looking at what we currently have as resources, and then how do we optimize those, or what can we do with this in order to actually make us financially sustainable and be able to serve more people in the future. So part of our mission is to grow with purpose. It means doubling the number of homes that we operate by 2028, but also the number of people that we serve. And that was really important that we had both of those aspects, because we could certainly build a lot more studios and one bedrooms. But because we're saying we want to double the number of people that we serve, it means that we are, very much top of mind about who we're serving, which is families. And that means we're building family-size housing, which is 2 bedrooms or above. We do have 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 5 bedrooms in some of our properties as well. And that's certainly something that we want to continue to reproduce and not lose. But obviously, as many of you probably all know, it's really, really expensive to actually build larger homes. So you have just less units. So definitely a bit more of a challenge. So again, we're really scaling up to continue the financial sustainability of the organization, and in order to grow and actually serve more people and try to meet that need that we currently still see.
No easy task. When I hear you speak, it seems to me like in some ways you're excelling at doing it on hard mode in some ways. So many skill sets required in the work that I hear that Entre Nous Femmes is taking on. So, developing organizational capacity, developing all of the different skill sets needed. When you came to Entre, Nous, Femmes, what internal capacity needed to be built in order to reach this stage of operations and growth? What kind of skill sets do you think are needed for the sector in order to achieve the kind of growth that Entre, Nous, Femmes has seen?
Yeah, it's yeah, and this is a great slide here that shows a little bit about what we're talking about in terms of building organizational capacity. For many, many years, organizations across the country were operators, and now we're also faced with opportunities as well as challenges to be really good asset managers and of renewal, which requires, construction and project management skills. And then you're also developing new housing, which requires an understanding of land use, development, financial and financing in particular. So those were kind of all things that I think the board at the time knew that they actually needed to bring in that expertise. And so they themselves, so just maybe start at the board level, there historically have been 3 board members for ENF for many, many years. They already, before I came, a few years before I came, expanded the board. So they had 9 members at that time because they knew that they needed to bring in board directors that had the expertise with, with development, with affordable housing, with accounting, with legal, a number of different skill sets. So they had already kind of seeded that ground before I came in. That new board then actually hired me, and they were looking for someone that had at least some real estate development experience in affordable housing and all those things that actually would help the organization to grow. And to give you an idea, when I started at ENF, we had just over 400 units, 11 properties, and we had 6 staff, including myself. And that was a very shoestring kind of organization. People were getting a bit stressed when people went on vacations. And also the other piece is that everybody worked a 4-day work week, which was amazing. But you can see, like, as we were growing or planning to grow, we obviously needed other positions, we need other skill sets. And so really one of the things that I did was really look at, if we were needing to grow, what kind of positions do we need within the organization? What skill sets do I have that I can retain? And also where I need to bring in folks that were obviously much smarter than me to do the work that we need to do. And a lot of our focus was on the operations of that as well, because I did have the real estate and finance expertise. So I kind of held that. And then we hired and created a more robust housing and property services department, because, operating housing is a significant, reason why we exist. And then I think on here, you also mentioned the development committee.
Yes.
So that's a little bit going back to our board. The board themselves also created, so the development committee is made up of different board members, and also we have some outside volunteers as well. And we actually deep dive into any development or acquisition projects, and therefore we can kind of go through things in more detail. Then they'll make a recommendation to the board to approve or not approve certain things. And that just kind of gives the board more time and space to actually think through some of these big financial decisions and big strategic decisions. And then when you get to the board, at least the folks that aren't on this committee know that there's been a lot of due diligence and questions and different things that have been already sorted. And what's coming to the board is actually well thought out recommendations for approval.
In operationalizing these skill sets and building up Entre, Nous, Femmes to have this capacity, when you look across the sector, what skill sets do you think are underestimated or underutilized in looking to achieve growth-based goals?
I think, a lot of organizations already do strategic planning, but I would say that we're really needing to look at the future and really assess the health of the organization, as well as scanning the landscape. So I think that more than ever, I think strategic planning is really critical to understanding where your organization is at right now and where you want to go in the future. And I often I used to work at Van City Credit Union, managing their affordable housing portfolio, assisting nonprofits to actually build affordable housing. And very often people will come with a project and say, I want to build housing. And often the conversation then starts with, well, why do you want to do this? What is the reasoning for this? How will you, figure this? Do you have the financial resources to do this? Do you have the capacity to do this? So I guess one of the things I would say is like, don't start with a project. You really do need to start with understanding your organization and both your opportunities and also your challenges. Because what we don't want to do is build something and maybe that's really successful, but you cannot actually operate it properly. And then you come into other troubles, or maybe during the construction and development, there are other issues that actually will cause risks to your organization. So that strategic piece is very important in my view.
Yeah, that going back to that theory of change, that overarching why, I hear you come back to it a lot. And I think that that's quite meaningful for organizations as they look to pursue their goals and ensuring that their missions are really shining through. And I think that that's part of perhaps the reason why Entre Nous Femmes shines. We have some questions in the chat. How did you fund new staff capacity?
Yeah, great question. So ENF had a bit of a reserve that they had built up from, operating for those many years. We actually decided to expand our staffing team. So just, we had 6 when I started. 4 years ago, we have 18 staff now, and actual departments that are, for their particular purposes, including finance, housing property services, and a community engagement group, and pseudo, in some ways, a community real estate group, which is mainly work that I do. And so we actually went to the board and said, we need to look at Entre Nous Femmes as a social enterprise. If we were a small business and we were hoping to scale and grow, if you were thinking about it, you would actually think about investing in your business. And that's kind of what we recommended, that we will need to actually hire and create that structure and that foundation so that we can deal with all the growth that will be happening. And so we actually used our own reserve funds to expand organizationally. We obviously sourced other grants and other things to do some of the planning work as well where we can, but often folks don't give you the operational funding. And so that is something that we have self-funded. And we also told the board and created a bit of a financial kind of outlook that says, until we have these other projects that are coming up, because we have 500 units that are under construction and are actually going to be opening by the end of 2027 or early 2027 and the end of 2027. And we know what the financials look like because those are pretty set budgets, etc. But we knew in order to get there, we're going to need to do some early investments. And so that's really how we funded part of the growth. We look at it very carefully and we add positions as we need them. But there was 2 years ago, we actually added 10 positions to the organization in order for us to just function. Because as a CEO, I knew that I cannot continue to do all the operating pieces and also try to think about things strategically and move the real estate portfolio forward. It was just not possible. So that was just a really worthwhile investment that we made. And we're definitely reaping the benefits of that now with our new team. And I think we're much better positioned to actually take on the growth that's coming in 6 months' time.
So the stress on the organization, that shoestring team, that was one of the ways perhaps that your organizational health was assessed in this process, would you say? The question in the chat asks if there were ways other than a financial lens that organizational health was assessed.
It was, it was mainly an operational capacity and risk assessment. So, like I said, sometimes we weren't able to manage or respond to residents' concerns in time, or we're not managing. So actually part of our survey, we actually asked people about how they felt about maintenance requests and things like that. And it was clear that we weren't able to get to some requests in time, or they were taking a long time to do certain things because we didn't actually have a maintenance team. at that point in time. We had contractors. And so we knew that that was probably going to be a low score because we already knew we didn't have enough people to actually provide that service properly. When you do that, then you go into potentially legal risks, right? You may have more complaints, you have other things. And so this was also a risk mitigation. At some point, if something really happens, we actually didn't have enough the capacity to actually deal with those issues. So you don't want to deal with these things when you're in a crisis. And so knowing what could actually happen, we're like, okay, I think we need to, maybe fill a couple of these positions, and then find other ways to be more efficient with our work. And we use technology wherever possible to do that as well.
So I'm hearing a lot that there's been a big change, and there's been a lot of change management. Questions in the chat speak to wanting to know about how that change has been evaluated, and if it's proving to be successful by your own metrics. But this has been a big change, and there's been a lot of change management, and you've spoken really well about how that change was structured and how you're looking at its evaluation. But was there any resistance to this change that ENF has seen internally, externally, challenges in the larger environment?
I think for the most part, the change and the creation of kind of a good foundation or structural change have been quite welcomed by both the board and the staff members. Obviously, the existing staff members had to get used to, oh, there's actually now directors and there's actually departments, and not everything is going to come to me. So, those are a bit of those adjustments. We created new positions, and we were trying to be very clear with, who's going to be doing what. So there was definitely a bit of churn. Like I said, we hired 10 new people in the first year, and we only had 6 people to begin with. So you can see like that, the new folks actually doubled. There were more new people than there were folks that were existing. And so one of those challenges was really on the onboarding, ensuring people understood what the policies were or actually worked to create those policies. And also, I would say it's more the organizational culture piece that is still something that we continue to work on, right? Your first year is people trying to learn their job and understand their place in the organization. We're in about year 2 right now. I think now things have a bit more stabilized, and there's less oversight that I need to provide. I guess that's a bit of a barometer for me as a CEO where, there's more delegation. And I don't necessarily need to be there at that meeting where, a year or 2 ago, I might need to be there to oversee. So I see that's a huge positive. I think I took my first vacation last year without actually looking at my emails. And that's 3 years into the job. So you see, there's a lot of work there. And I guess that's a bit of, a barometer of like, oh, folks know what they're doing. Things are getting taken care of, even though there might be some emergencies, etc. People knew kind of how to work together and collaborate as a team to sort that out.
I was happy about you not checking your emails, not realizing it had been 3 years. That's a really hard push, but it's certainly paying off. All of the major wins from ENF are really aspirational. So thank you for all of your work. That said, looking at the broader sector, where do you find partnerships, and what role do they play on this journey? Maybe that's a good time to go to the next slide there.
Yeah, the partnership is a strategic asset. I think this is a really great slide that kind of summarizes a bit of our strategy. We are, with 500 units or so, we are considered medium size in British Columbia, although I know in other jurisdictions that is super tiny. If we were in Ontario, we'd be like super small. Yeah. But in BC, we don't actually have huge housing organizations, or there's quite a few of them that are over 1,000 units. And so for us to actually go and seek out new lands, which is often municipal lands, or win an RFP, different things, we knew that we really needed some partners to maybe help bolster some of our applications and different things. So we did that, and we sought partners that are values aligned, that we had something to offer. So one of our projects in Port Moody is a partnership with Macola Housing Society. They're actually BC's largest Indigenous housing provider, and they do housing across the province, except that they had never built housing or operate housing in the Lower Mainland at that time. However, we've been operating in the Lower Mainland for over 40 years. And so, however, ENF had not actually constructed a project, right, for 35 years. So it was kind of a nice combination there. And, and really the people that we serve were the same people that they're serving, although they're just much more focused as an Indigenous organization. So we definitely saw some really great alignment there. So that's a bit of way that we, kind of made our applications stronger in, getting those funding opportunities or different public lands. We also was focused on partnerships with, like I said, municipalities or other partners. Again, even though we had now 13 properties, we don't actually own all those properties. So about more than half of them are actually leased. Right. And so there are restrictions of what you can do with those lands. So we had a really limited land base and actually to grow the organization unit wise. And so we were seeking other opportunities, like I said, with municipalities or in some ways, BC Housing had a piece of property. And so we were going after that as well. And then the other way that we partner is also about how we serve our communities. So we have limited capacity and we also have units that we need to fill. And we also know we have 500 units in the future that we need to fill. So we started creating referral partnerships. And so that meant that we were going to other housing organizations or service organizations that had clients. They had maybe a housing program to help people move into permanent housing. We would work with those organizations and say, we will prioritize your clients and by your referrals. And in turn, what happens is that if there was an issue with that tenancy, or maybe that person's having some challenges, we can go back to their the agency that referred them and actually reach out for help and say, hey, would you mind maybe assisting us or perhaps assisting that tenant with their tenancy? These are some of the issues. And the resident actually has a bit more support available. And then we're able to also leverage the expertise and resources of these other organizations. And of course, reach the very specific populations that we were trying to serve, given that we don't do a lot of advertising or all those things, but we really want to make sure that our housing is for those equity deserving groups. So that's been fairly successful so far. We don't have a lot of housing units available at the moment because we're just about to open. But, we're just so excited that we're able to share this with a lot of our partners and be like, these are all the units, please refer folks over to us because we're going to have these new homes next year.
Fantastic. You spoke a little bit about municipal partnerships and how that can be a part of accessing land. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I know that this doesn't exist everywhere. Municipalities, it really it's different across different jurisdictions, but we do encourage, I'm on the board of BC Nonprofit Housing Association. We certainly encourage municipalities to think about using their public lands for community benefit and particularly for affordable housing, right? Land cost is a barrier to actually developing affordable housing. And so if you can at least get through that one hurdle, that gets you a little bit closer to actually developing more affordable housing. We've been quite successful with the City of Vancouver. There's been a number of public lands that they have done a call for operators to operate and develop that housing. City of Surrey, City of Coquitlam, North Vancouver. So in the Lower Mainland, I think we are quite lucky to have a number of municipalities that are offering some properties. We have not done a partnership yet with, let's say, another nonprofit organization with their own property. So we haven't done that. We've kind of partnered together to get other lands. And I would say this was a high priority for us just because we had a limited land base. And so that was one of those opportunities that we pursued in order to grow the portfolio.
There's a quick question in the chat. With current government funding reduced, do you see consolidation becoming a theme within the sector in BC, larger in the country?
Yes, quite frankly, it's already historically, you can see that, right? In Ontario, you have much larger housing organizations, and they did that back in the day when funding was no longer available. And you can see that scale assist with surviving some of these challenges when there is no government funding. I think BC is now, unfortunately, in that position. We have a BC Nonprofit Housing Society, we have 800 members. More than 600 of them actually only operate one building or 10 units or less. So you can see there's a lot of smaller organizations. And a lot of them are service organizations run by volunteer boards. I think each of those organizations and even larger organizations have to kind of look at their capacity and their abilities and go, are we able to still steward these, these resources and assets for the community well into the future based on what, we have currently? And if that's not the case, then I think these conversations about consolidation within the sector is definitely very timely. We are definitely open to that as well, even though, I think we're doing quite well. We're in a fairly solid place right now financially and into the future because of the projects that we've been able to bring in. However, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And definitely costs are increasing, right? There's insurance costs, like we cannot control that. There's a lot of costs that we can't control. So is there a way without losing, and this is a question that I haven't, tested yet, but is there a way that we can consolidate without perhaps losing the essence of each individual organization? Not every organization serve exactly the same or operate exactly the same. But for me, it's more about, are there some basic, co-location or efficiencies that can help reduce some of your overhead costs, perhaps? Is there a way that we can still serve, the people that we want to serve together in a more optimized way? And quite frankly, one of the big draws for me for consolidation is that we have a hard time finding really skilled people in the sector, right? So, if your organization already has, these positions and these folks, that might be a great way to kind of bring them together with our team, for example, because, we don't have the expertise in certain areas because we weren't able to fill those positions or we just didn't have folks with that experience. So I think from a human resources perspective, that's actually also a plus. Consolidation doesn't always mean that I think you need to lay off people necessarily. I don't think that's what we would want to do in any type of merger or consolidation. We really want to see what skill sets there are that we can all share that really just builds, both organizations or multiple organizations and bring us all into a better place so that we can serve the folks that we intending to serve. Because ultimately, why we need to survive as an organization, why we continue as an organization is to actually complete the mission, right? Is to serve and to provide affordable homes to that community member. And so what we're doing really, or considering consolidation, to me, is just a way of thinking about how you would actually implement that and do that better.
How does your community real estate strategy support long-term sustainability?
Yeah, so we created this strategy to really understand, where we are going and how we will achieve those goals, like again, doubling. And so there was multiple strategies or options that we kind of considered. One of those options is also, developing on new lands, developing our own lands, also retrofitting and making sure that we're able to maintain our existing buildings was really a key priority. And then we also had acquisitions. And so all those things kind of come together to, it's not just about growing, but it's actually about diversifying some of our revenue streams because we knew that government wasn't really available to continue to further that growth. And we need to find other ways to sustain ourselves. And that's really kind of the lens that we took in order to go, how can we be less reliant and be able to find other ways that we can sustain ourselves. I see that you have this here. I can talk a little bit about this as well. So like I mentioned, the revenue diversification pieces. One of the major issues was that obviously we had like 90% of our portfolio had expiring operating agreements. So we had to replace those expiring operating agreements in those units that were deeply, deeply affordable. So these were all RGI, rent geared to income, or income assistant rent units. We were lucky that there was a community housing fund that was providing new subsidized housing, because I knew that the only way that we're going to be able to provide income assistance type rents at, we're at $500 or maybe $600 per month, is to actually replace those with new projects. So we were successful in getting 3 CHF funded projects, and they essentially basically replaced the units that are currently coming off operating agreements. And then what we also did was we purchased 2 additional properties through the BC Rental Protection Fund and used those as opportunities to actually bring in new revenue into the organization. And then we also looked at developing more mixed income buildings that weren't subsidized. And of course, there were more low-end market units in those buildings. However, they will then generate that additional revenue that can kind of cross-subsidize and stabilize the organization as well. So that was kind of a way that we're able to then maintain right now all the existing rents of the expiring operating agreements. And then at turnover, we have a goal of 30% loan on market and 70% RGI, so that we still maintain some significant affordability for those units, but allowing those buildings to actually still, break even, if not make a little bit of surplus to actually sustain the operations of those buildings.
So you've been very business plan conscious since coming into ENF, but in the current funding and economic environment, I think it's fair to say all of the BC housing sector has been challenged recently. What other sort of tools or strategies do you plan to employ to navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, maybe we can go to do you mind, Severna, we proceed to a couple slides ahead? I think there's a great slide about growth in action, and I think that will, thank you. Thank you, Gabrielle. So Severin, yes, the other thing we've been looking at is, basically creative financing, right? In the future, there's really, for new developments, there's a lack of pre-development funds, right? Governments are dried up. CMHC, the National Housing Strategy, that's pretty much done. There's no more seed funding. So how do you get new projects on the go? How do you finance other things that doesn't rely just on government? So one of the things that we are testing out and we're hoping to launch this summer is a community bond campaign. So a community bond is a financial instrument that a nonprofit or charity can actually utilize to basically ask community members to provide investments into a bond. And so basically it's a debt instrument. You're creating basically your own line of credit with this kind of campaign. And we have now, we want to raise $3 million for one of our projects. It's 800 Commercial Drive project, because we need at least $3 million to actually complete the project. It is a fully funded, it's subsidized, etc. It'll go under construction. It'll go into construction by this fall. However, there's also some commercial space in that project. And we actually, as an organization, need to provide that amount in order to actually complete the full project. And so we thought this would be a really great opportunity to test how maybe community members are responding to actually making an investment in affordable housing, given the crisis. And so a community bond provides a set term, it provides a set interest rate, and so the investor will actually receive their principal and whatever additional interest over that term or at the end of that term. And we provide, what we're hoping to do is provide some very low access, so low barrier, so like maybe $2,000 to all the way to $25,000 as the minimum. And that allows both also retail investors, but also institutions, foundations, and other philanthropic dollars to come in and say, if you really want to make a difference in affordable housing, this is one way that you can do this and support this very deeply affordable housing project that we have on the go. And eventually, when we create this bond, we also want to do a few more cycles of this so that we can create an affordable housing fund so that we can actually use those dollars towards future acquisitions as well. So we are looking at potentially acquiring slightly newer buildings with less capital renewal risk. That again generates that additional revenue for Entre, Nous, Femmes Housing Society as we move forward.
As you have developed this creative financing strategy for Entre, Nous, Femmes, and you have seen the lay of the land in the sector, can this strategy be replicated? Are there misconceptions about creative financing in the within the sector?
I would say yes, it is replicable. We're working with Tapestry Community Capital. They're based out of Ontario, and they have ran multiple different affordable housing campaigns with different organizations, predominantly in Ontario. And they have been successful in actually raising pre-development dollars for their projects because, again, they don't have a BC Housing. They didn't have a Vancity Community Foundation that provided them with easier access to PDF funds. And now we're in that situation. So I think that is definitely replicable. There is a proof of concept that now exists. And just so you all know, like we've been looking at this bond probably for 3 years, and we actually did do a feasibility about 3 years ago and found that we did not have enough capacity to actually move forward with it. So you do need right? We had 6 people. This was just not something that we're going to be able to manage well. And really, if you're going to do something like this, obviously you want this to be very successful. You want it to be supported, and you don't want to be, creating some capacity issues within your organization. So we came back to this idea about a year ago and went, we have some really great projects. I think this would really work for this. And now we have some dedicated staff members and capacity that actually allows us to really optimize this opportunity. And that's why we went and moved forward with that. I think that's just something that organizations really need to assess in doing something like this, because obviously this is something extra that is not something that you normally would do. So you do have to think about how will we actually resource this aspect. And I think the other thing is that, there's Build Canada Homes. Now that's a little bit more challenging program right now because there's no set parameters, and they're asking organizations to basically make a pitch of what they think that they need in order to do something for their future. I think the opportunity here is if you are a smaller organization, that if there's an opportunity to maybe collaborate with other organizations within your region or your community, and if you can kind of work together to create something that maybe benefit more than just your organization. Unfortunately, right now, the project by project seems to be less attractive to government, and they really want to have maybe less administration or something like that. And they kind of want a more robust portfolio. So that's going to be challenging for the smaller organizations. And the other lesson I think I've learned is that you really need to think big. Like what is potentially possible based on, who's in your network, what's happening. And right now we are working and pitching a revolving construction loan fund. Right. So rather than just look at our portfolio and we need this much, we're like, well, maybe it's hundreds of millions of dollars we should be asking. Right. Like, so that it has an opportunity to scale. And if you can come up with something that can not only benefit your organization, but perhaps other organizations as well, that can continue to do the work that we need to do. And in this case, it's really about patient capital, low interest financing during construction, to provide us with some savings and increase the affordability, but also the viability of affordable housing projects that we're trying to complete. And we sourced a very reputable financial partner in Vancity Community Foundation, who already do a lot of impact loans and impact and social finance. And so those are kind of the avenues that currently does exist across the country. And it's about sourcing those, maybe expanding your networks a little bit, and also asking organizations that have done it and learning from their experience as well. So hopefully we are able to, today we're able to give you a few things that we have done, and happy to make a connection later on as well. But I think there are still possibilities. And I do encourage people to think bigger and just reach out and see what is possible.
Thinking big, what a great vision to have when especially we all feel so constrained at this moment. What wonderful words to hear, that we can think big and can think about each other. When we're often, I think folks are so focused on the next build or the next retrofit or the next project in their immediate pipeline. If you could give your financial sustainability and growth mindset just a couple of words, in a few words, what is your approach here?
I in a few words, okay. I think it is about imagination and not limiting your possibilities. And I'm going to say more than a few words. Sorry, Severn. Okay. And I think oftentimes in the nonprofit sector, and especially in community housing, we are looking at restraints, right? Fiscal austerity. There's like a less than mentality. And where I found where opportunities lie is when I try to break out of that fear and go, okay, I'm going to share with everybody these ideas. It's not a competitive thing. It is a way that we can maybe, that this idea might be interesting to that organization, and somehow, we might get together and form a partnership. Right. And so just thinking a little bit bigger, thinking about collaborating, and rather than kind of stay in the sense of fear that we can't, like, there's just not enough, there's not enough resources, there's not enough of anything. I think the challenge for our sector is to figure out, how do we bring in more? How do we bring in more investments? How do we bring in more capital? How do we bring in people with the skill sets and the experience that we might need in the organization? And that, I think, helps grow your mindset in terms of more possibilities, rather than a very fear-based approach where, like, we just can't do anything, we'll just only do this thing. And you may miss some opportunities out there, right? Not everything is going to work out, right? There's definitely going to be testing and failure and all those kinds of things, but you can't really get to that spot where you want to be if you don't actually try. So I guess that's kind of what I would leave folks with.
Such fantastic moving from vision to action in all of your speaking today. We have one question in the chat that we missed. Are there aspects of being a charity that have helped accelerate your growth, or conversely created barriers that non-charitable housing providers might not face?
Yeah, great question. I would say the charitable status certainly has helped with some reducing operating costs. Like, we do get some tax exemptions, especially when we are also buying properties. We don't pay property transfer tax. So that really helps with, making those acquisitions actually work. And I think, obviously we're able to get grants and other things from foundations that might actually require to be giving to a charity, although I think that law has actually recently changed. So I don't think there's necessarily barriers. There's certainly some financial benefits to that. And that's why we're also very keenly aware that we continue to provide, poverty alleviation. That is actually the charitable definition that we still need to have in our mission. We are still very much prioritizing the deeply affordable housing in the units. And in the future, what we may need to do is, if we have a huge amount of, let's say, investment properties or, market housing or something like that, we may want to spin that into our nonprofit that we also own an organization that is a nonprofit. We may need to move that into there for kind of CRA purposes. But right now, our mission in almost every project that we're doing has some sort of restriction or potentially a rent cap on those. So they're not, so they do in some ways meet that, to us, the mission and the purpose of why we're actually doing these things. So I would say right now, I think we have a bit of a positive advantage as a charity rather than a detriment. Yeah, and we're going to continue to buy properties based on our charitable status as much as we can to kind of save on some of those costs. And ideally also open us up for when we're doing the bond campaign, we can actually ask investors and say, would you like to donate back your interest? And actually continue to generate and do a little bit of fundraising that way as well. So that's another bit of an advantage.
Thank you so much to Severin and Lilian for this wonderful conversation today. We are going to wrap things here for the webinar. You will receive the recording and several resources after the end of the session. So yeah, thank you once again. It was a great content. I think everyone was really engaged in the audience. So thank you both. And you can visit our website as well to learn more about our upcoming events. And the webinar series will resume in September with a webinar about student housing. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.